It's not easy to keep a video game franchise afloat. Unlike movies or TV, major titles in this industry are rarely outright retired, as they're inherently more malleable thanks to ever-changing technology. Keeping an audience's attention and interest for decades, though, well, that requires hard work. Gamers are a dedicated lot, and if you hook them with lovable characters and detailed mythology, they'll always root for you, even in the wake of samey sequels or uninspired spin-offs. However, publishers are always looking to make franchises more mainstream to make more money, and that sometimes means introducing elements that lose the very essence of what made them special in the first place. When this happens, a reboot is in order, but even that's a risk. We've seen big names try this and fall completely flat. Cough, Devil May Cry, cough. But sometimes franchises come through the other side better than ever. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game reboots that saved dying franchises. Number 10, Ninja Gaiden. When it comes to spectacle fighters, for my money it doesn't get much better than Ninja Gaiden. Sure, it might only really be the original Xbox game and its sequel that reached the highest heights of the genre, but they were so good it made up for any missteps in the following years. They were so solid and so popular that you might not have even realized that they weren't the first Ninja Gaiden games though. There were no fewer than 9 titles released before that reboot in 2004, with the series launching all the way back in 1988 in the arcades and on the NES. Back then, it was a simple yet devilishly difficult action platformer, but it burned out quickly, with the final title of this era releasing only 4 years later in 1992. 12 years after that, and it was back for another short stint, better than ever. Number 9, Prey. Now this might be a contentious inclusion on this list. There'll no doubt be fans out there who think that the new iteration of Prey doesn't deserve to bear their name, and that the cancelled Prey 2 should have been seen through to release. However, while it is true that the original sequel looked great in pre-release trailers, which could have been totally unreflective of the in-development product by the way, it's a fool's errand to compare a product that we have to something that just doesn't exist. From the focus on player choice to a sandbox environment that feels genuinely lived in and real, Arcane's take on the series is the kind of RPG you rarely get in the blockbuster space anymore, and it's a shame most players approached it like a regular first-person shooter. The foundations it built are solid, and it would be a tragedy if there isn't a sequel. Number 8, Star Wars Battlefront. Now I'll be the first person to admit that EA's Star Wars Battlefront reboot series has been a complete mess. The first was a solid if uninspired title that appealed more to casual fans, while the sequel was a marked improvement in the gameplay department, but a complete cluster F in terms of microtransactions and player progression. However, the devs have done a grand job at shaking off that monumentally bad first impression. As the years have worn on, Battlefront 2 has transformed into an excellent shooter, full to the brim with new features, characters, and locations that have been directly designed to please fans. It might be too little too late for some, but at least EA is still sticking with Battlefront games. The series was brown bread before the company revived it, doomed to languish alongside so many other retired Star Wars series. The fact that it's alive at all is a miracle, and the fact that it's still half decent is even more so. Number 7, Tomb Raider. By the end of the 2000s, the Tomb Raider franchise was in need of change. It's not that the games themselves had dipped in quality, in fact the final release of this era Underworld brought some much needed refinements to the formula. It's just that the world had moved on. Lara's adventures represented an era of the medium that was no longer relevant. In 2008, everything was gritty and adult and mature, and Lara's good old-fashioned brand of action was no longer cool. Fortunately, Crystal Dynamics had a vision of how to make the series relevant again, essentially by transforming it into a bloodier Uncharted. I don't mean that as a dig either. 2013's Tomb Raider embraced the developments in platforming action Sony's series had made, while still keeping its own unique identity thanks to the survivalist themes and grittier setting. It was awesome, and it's a shame that the franchise couldn't maintain the momentum with the sequels. Number 6, Wolfenstein The New Order. For a while, it looked as though Wolfenstein had earned its retirement. The series actually debuted all the way back in 1981 as a rudimentary shooter, but it wasn't until Wolfenstein 3D kicked into gear that it became a household name. However, while both it and Doom were once the giants of the FPS genre, the Nazi killing series struggled to maintain its trajectory following the first handful of titles. Wolfie 3D dropped in 1991, and there wouldn't be another game until Return to Castle Wolfenstein 10 years later. When that failed to catch on, Activision tried again with a clean reboot in 2009, which came out 2 years too late as the world had moved away from World War II and towards modern military shooters. At that point, most publishers would have just given up, but new owners Bethesda pushed on and dropped Wolfenstein The New Order, which kept the protagonist but remixed everything else, and somehow managed to breathe new life into a 3-decade-old series. Number 5. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. Like Ninja Gaiden, Prince of Persia was a franchise which debuted in the late 80s, but really only came into its own in the PS2 era after an overdue reboot. The 1989 original is a tough-as-nails platformer that absolutely sucks to play now, but it was popular enough to give the prince a footing in the medium thanks to ridiculously high critic scores. This creative streak continued with a sequel 4 years later, which was just as punishing. The series then faced the jump to 3D, which it survived admirably with the creatively titled Prince of Persia 3D. Does everything it says in the tin, really. After that release, the rights ended up at Ubisoft, who decided a full reboot was necessary going forward. In came Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, which kept the general aesthetic but updated the mechanics for a new generation, introducing light combat elements and the key rewind time feature. It turned out to be one of the biggest games of that generation, even if Ubi would run the series into the ground pretty quickly afterwards. Number 4. Doom. Wolfenstein never really moved beyond a handful of games spread across decades before Bethesda successfully rebooted it in the 2010s, which at the very least must have made it easier for them to come up with a fresh start. Sadly, Doom didn't have that same freedom for a clean break. Unlike its sister series, the demon-slaying shooter never really went out of fashion. After a bunch of amazing sequels, the developers switched gears with Doom 3, swapping out the heavy metal violence for a more somber survival horror-inspired experience. It wasn't exactly Resident Evil, but it was way more atmospheric than the previous titles. After that, the series was set to diverge even more, taking a page out of Call of Duty's book for a squad-based romp on Earth. Thankfully, that incarnation was cancelled, but it meant the series went dark for most of the 2000s and the 2010s. It wasn't until 2016 that it was reborn, this time simply as Doom, shrugging the baggage off and returning to the tight demon-killing glory of the first couple of releases, this time gloriously realized with cutting-edge next-gen graphics. Number 3. Mortal Kombat. While a lot of the games on this list were in need of a reboot because they moved too far away from what they originally were, Mortal Kombat needed a clean break because it was too much Mortal Kombat. Throughout the 2000s, new MK games were being pumped out at a ridiculous rate, but the core fighting wasn't really changing. The developers had nailed the gory 3D fighting system early on, and the only thing the new games had to offer were gimmicks like Mortal Kombat chess, which I actually quite enjoyed, believe it or not, different fatalities, and of course new characters. The story had also bloated beyond belief, to the point where just about every world-ending threat had arrived and been bested. There was nowhere to really go, only the die-hard fans understood what the hell was going on, and too many characters and fighting styles had made the core combat itself unwieldy. It took the publisher going bankrupt to get the studio to rethink their plans, but in 2011, they opted to cut the fat, travel back in time, and pick up with a fresh slate. The 3D fighting returned to 2.5D, the character list was refined, and the story mode became the major new hook. It worked a dream, and Mortal Kombat has been at the top of its game ever since. Number 2. Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Now, just to clarify something, this entry isn't saying that Modern Warfare has single-handedly saved the entire COD franchise, as there's far too many developers and sub-series fluctuating in quality that have kept it going through ups and downs TM over the years. However, the latest release has saved both the Modern Warfare brand as well as Infinity Ward's releases in general. While they were once king of the hill, the studio lost its momentum following Modern Warfare 2. After that game launched, the heads of the company, along with a bunch of key employees, parted ways with publisher Activision. A whole bunch of Infinity Ward's major talent was suddenly absent, and the following games struggled to reclaim the quality they were once known for. Modern Warfare 3 was an unfocused mess, Ghosts was a botched attempt at a new franchise, and while Infinite Warfare was indeed ambitious, it came at a time where fans were well and truly sick of sci-fi CODs. Now, though, the team has finally rebuilt, and they're back with a fresh reboot of their most popular title, and the franchise has never been better. Number 1. God of War. God of War was one of the franchises that defined a good decade of the PlayStation brand, with the first 2 sequels giving the PS2 a killer app, offering some of the biggest spectacles you could find on any platform. The hack and slasher became an instant global success. Each game got bigger and bigger, and by the 3rd release, the bloodthirsty Kratos literally killed Greek mythology itself. He also became a pop culture icon and, more importantly, an easy target for critics of video game violence. While a lot of the fear-mongering was unfounded, there was something to be said about Kratos as a character. He was defined purely by his rage, one-dimensional in a way that made evolution impossible. The gameplay itself, while never bad, started with the bar set so high that subsequent sequels felt like diminishing returns. By the time 3's follow-up spin-off Ascension came out, everyone was wondering whether Sony should just retire the franchise. It had become a series of checklists being ticked off, and the scale had grown unwieldy. The company actually recognized this though, and put the series on ice for a few years. It would take the director of the second game, Cory Barlog, to persuade Sony that Kratos could be developed into a 3-dimensional construct and continue to carry the franchise before another game was greenlit. Of course, he was right to do so, as God of War 2018 not only saved the series, but set a new bar for Sony's exclusives as a whole. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you think that these game reboots saved their respective franchises, or were they better off just continuing the trajectory they were on? Either way, while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, you've been watching WhatCulture, and I'll see you soon.